discuss the NRF and break it down and how to navigate as early career researchers, the National Research Foundation, what they offer. Welcome, Tracy.
Thank you very much. So thanks for that intro, and also no thank you to putting me after the likes of Stephen Chan, Bettine, David and Seb, who know the NRF inside out. I haven't prepared a presentation. I wanted just to have an informal conversation. I'm not here today to speak as a polar scientist. I'm not a polar scientist. I'm not an early career scientist. I'm a research manager. And maybe just to introduce myself to those of you who don't know me, and then give you an idea of what successful proposals look like and what they need to have. And some of the things, I've got 4 take-home messages for you that I think you should consider in the writing up of proposals to make them successful or to be more successful in them. And then just to give you a little bit of a breakdown of a science system that's in serious flux. I'm speaking from a South African point of view, from an NRF point of view, and from excuse me, but I think this conversation is going to be around things that are globally applicable as well. So just to introduce myself, my name is Tracy Gloendeck. Thank you for that kind intro, and I am a program director within the Knowledge Advancement and Support Directorate at the NRF, which is one of 3 big funding directorates within the NRF. And my portfolio for my sins runs from archaeology to zoology, but a big part of what I do relates to anything from the estuaries to the continent. So it applies to coastal research, marine research, Southern Ocean research, the Atlantic, the Indian Ocean, and obviously the islands and Antarctica. So I am, I've got, what is my advice to my younger self? Follow what you're passionate in. Don't listen to your parents. Don't worry about other people, and don't worry about what they say. The most important thing is stuff that you enjoy and stuff that you're passionate about, because that's the only thing you're ever going to be good at. Another piece of advice to my younger self is do your PhD when you don't have children. So I'm currently a PhD candidate at Stellenbosch University. It's not going as well as one would like when you have to homeschool children, but I suspect that a lot of us have these challenges. So I'm not going to assume to be a researcher. I get to see a lot of research proposals in a lot of different fields. Some of them from established researchers, some of them from early career researchers, and everything in between. And I'm also not going to talk about the specific programs that are available at the NRF, because you can get onto the NRF website and you'll be able to see what's there. The most important thing that I would say is that keep your eyes out for opportunities. There's a new opportunity coming up that's under development at the NRF that is specifically for early career researchers, and it's a developmental program that obviously would be geared quite specifically to a lot of the people in this group, to try and build the capacity of our early career researchers. So I'm going to dive right in there and say there are 4 things that you need to be mindful of to write a good proposal and to establish yourself as a researcher beyond early career status. And the first thing from a South African perspective specifically is to look at the context. So we operate within a global context. So this group would and should be available be aware of things like the Sustainable Development Goals, the decades of the ocean, the various things that are happening within SCA, within the United Nations. Stephen Chan alluded to some of those. And you need to be aware of what the objectives of those particular things are. So, for instance, the Sustainable Development Goals, you cannot just look at one Sustainable Development Goal. These things interact and interface and overlap. You cannot look at life under the sea without considering things like food security. You cannot look at these things without considering, the various other things, looking at things like cities and what sea level rise will do to cities and livelihoods and poverty and migration and all of those kinds of things. So be aware that funding opportunities that arise, not just within the NRF specifically, but generally across the world, are always looking for African partners. Sometimes the thematic focus is quite narrow, but there is a call open at the moment that's called, it's a Belmont Forum Future Earth call, and it's Pathways to Sustainability. And I sat in on a 2-day workshop last week, and in my breakaway group, out of the, I think, 12 early career scientists that I was talking to, I think about 8 of them had an oceans type focus. So there are definitely opportunities there, but the requirement is that you combine at least 3 of the SDGs, and that's not particularly helpful if you don't know what the SDGs are beyond just life under the sea. The second thing is to understand the local context. So the National Research Foundation is a funding agency that works with the Departments of Science and Innovation. If you as applicants are not aware of what is going on in South Africa, generally looking at, for instance, the white paper, which focuses very heavily on innovation and societal impact, if you are, if you're not aware of those kinds of things and you write a proposal that doesn't speak to those things sincerely, your chances of success are going to be significantly reduced. The second thing that I wanted you to think about, and it's becoming more and more important, I'm pretty sure on a global level, but I'm speaking specifically for South Africa and the NRF, is this need for transdisciplinarity. And there's a lot of anxiety that goes around this whole notion of transdisciplinarity. I don't really know anything about social scientists, or I don't want to deal with economists, or any of those things. I just want to do my pure science, in my little bubble. is short-sighted. You need to start expanding that, and Stephen spoke a little bit about that. You need to look at larger research questions. So it is not helpful to send in a proposal to say, I'm going to go and look at this little bug on Marion Island because this little bug is really interesting. What you need to do is you need to have a look at what is the larger research question, what is the importance of this within a larger research context. And one of the things, obviously from the white paper, but more and more as a funding agency and as a disperser of South African taxpayers' money, we need to understand what is the importance of the work that you're doing on society. There has to be some kind of societal link, whether that link is immediate. Some of the work is fairly easy. It might be a little bit further down the road, but writing proposals that disregards the importance of other kinds of impact other than scientific impact is really quite important. So other kinds of impact, some of them Stephen had a look at, spoke about things like democracy, looking at the world order, looking at global relationships, the relationship between the United States and the rest of the world in terms of climate change and the Paris Agreement, the role of Russia, the role of China. These are important contexts for you to have in the back of your head, so that you can start linking the questions that you're asking to a larger societal importance. So a really great example, I think it's at Scott Base. They're doing work on the psychology of isolation. They've got isolation pods, and this is all in preparation for the Mars voyage, and you know, how do people that spend extended periods of time in isolation cope, and what are the psychological and the physiological issues around those kinds of things. Other kinds of impact, economics. You can look at things like law, you can look at things like engineering, you can look at things like design, and all of these things talk to different disciplines, possibly from your own. So one of the things that concerns me a little bit with specific conferences and sometimes these kinds of conversations is that you need to be really mindful of not getting yourself caught in what they call an echo chamber, where you have the same message, the same conspiracy theory over and over and over again, without actually going outside, without actually reading more and finding out what the larger context is and what the larger questions are that need to be addressed and need to be considered. Transdisciplinarity is always very problematic. You can't just leap into transdisciplinarity. Often it's multidisciplinarity. So there might be oceanographers looking at physical or geo or physiological, chemical oceanography. That's a multidisciplinary kind of approach. You then shift on to interdisciplinary, where you start bringing in other disciplines and you work perhaps more in silos to answer the same kind of questions. To the ability to co-create and move across to transdisciplinarity, which is where the big money is at the moment. So a really nice example of that is Professor Stephen Chown established APECSSA. And the role of his establishing the Antarctic legacy was to create a platform that would allow social sciences, law, humanities, historians, those kinds of people to have access to historical data relating to South Africa's role in the Antarctic. And those of you from South Africa will know the role that APECSSA plays today. Stephen has moved away. The platform is working really, really well, and there are a lot of projects that are using nationally and internationally, actually, that are using the data within the archives to do more social science, economics, law, the history, those kinds of research projects. So one thing will lead to the next thing, will lead to the next thing. So so looking across the disciplines is really quite important. The third thing, collaborations and your networks. Again, this has come up. I think all four of our previous speakers have alluded to the importance of networks and the importance of collaborations. But I think, one of the most important things is to create relationships. Collaboration is a social endeavor. It is not something that can happen without some kind of social or human interaction and human relationship. You get to know people. As far as I'm concerned, conferences should be all about the tea breaks and the conversations that you have in the networking sessions and those kinds of things, because that helps you create those kinds of relationships that you can then decide, okay, this person is working in a really interesting area. We have a reasonable set of shared values, for instance. We have the same kind of ideas, and then you can start working with those. It's important that these relationships work across institutions in South Africa within the context, for instance, of previously disadvantaged institutions. You know, it is not helpful for me as a funding body to get 20 applications from UCT and see no evidence of you know, some kind of sincere effort to bring in other institutions, institutions that might not be very strong, particularly in your area, but might be able to contribute meaningfully in, you know, in other areas. Some of the HDIs are very strong in other areas, and it's important that that you bear in mind that bringing these guys in within the context of moving across disciplines as well as within disciplines is quite important. One of the things that that hasn't really been mentioned is the importance of creating the relationships. Maybe Stephen touched on it a little bit, get to know who the people are that play in the space, the policymakers, the funders, the, you know, when I talk about SANAP, which is one of about 12 funding instruments that I look after, I talk about my researchers. I talk about my students, and I talk about my successes. And whilst that is not completely true, it is because I have very good, very strong personal relationships with most of the members of the SANAP community. Not only those that are funded, but those that are part of the wider community and that you know, that play in the same space. And you know, understanding who the people are and getting to know who the people are from a funder's point of view is a really good way for me to assess, you know, how cohesive the community is, how inclusive the different people in the community are, who they're collaborating with, where they're working. It also helps me to track the students that I support. So, for instance, Seb Swart has been one of my students from master's level, and all the way up to where he is sitting in Sweden at the moment, and we still have contact, we still email, and those kinds of relationships are really important, not just before a funding call goes out, but throughout the entire process. So if you're experiencing difficulties, if you need more money, if you need money reallocated, if I know who you are and I have an idea of what you're doing, and how productive you are and how hard you're trying to bring in previously disadvantaged students, all of those kinds of things. In the 100 emails that I receive a day, the chances are pretty good that I will look at your email and prioritize those kinds of things. So the SANAP call, unfortunately, only goes out once every 3 years, and it is closed. So access to SANAP at the moment is not an option for those of you that are not already in the grouping that we've just adjudicated. But what I would really strongly recommend to any early career scientist, before you write a proposal or thinking about writing a proposal, is offer your services up to sit in on an adjudication panel. Even if you sit in as an observer, because what we try to do is we try to have really scientists in to adjudicate the science proposals that we receive. The learning is absolutely life-changing. Make yourselves available. It doesn't have to be something in your field. In fact, it's probably better if it isn't, otherwise it creates a conflict of interest. But just to get an idea of how competitive these funding applications are, the requirement for science, scientific rigor, how you need to answer questions as per the application process, kinds of things that are required to do well in scoring, and the way people around the table quickly pick up on insincerity and window dressing and double dipping and you know, those kinds of things. So if there's anything that I can offer you is in the next round of panels, which will be around about this time next year, will be for competitive support for rated research, which is one of my funding instruments as well. There is a marine and geo section, and offer yourself, you know, send me an email and say, look, I'd really like to sit in, you know, as an observer just for a day. You don't have to sit in for the whole day. You can sit in for half a day. Half a day will be plenty to teach you exactly what you're in for when you put a proposal into a any funding instrument that you have. But the team was and Seb was and David actually alluding to the various opportunities at the NRF. But it's also important for you guys to remember that the NRF is not the only player in the game. Department of Higher Education and Training, you know, there's TIA, there's international. As I said, we've got a Belmont Forum call that's open now where South Africa is involved. You know, we've just closed a call and are busy with funding now, which looks at ocean sustainability, also with the Belmont Forum. And, you know, these are proposals that look obviously at an international context, but you're not necessarily going to find them right on the NRF website. There might be a tiny little note saying the NRF is involved in something like this, which would mean that the NRF is putting money forward for South African researchers and support for South African researchers. And we're always looking for good South African participation and representation in these calls. And you don't need to be a project leader. You can be, you know, a project partner. And you need to reach out, and you need to speak to me or to other funders or to your colleagues, your mentors, your supervisors, your research officers, to make sure that you're aware of these, and then make sure that you are very conversant with the overall objectives and the overall context of any particular funding instrument. The fourth thing that I wanted to mention to you is the importance of communicating your science. So one of the earlier speakers said, you know, celebrate your small successes, and yes, absolutely, you know, jump up and down when you get your first published, you know, your first paper published. I know I did, but it's really, really important that you, from the beginning of a particular proposal, start to think about how you're going to communicate your science, the value of your science into society. Who are you speaking to? Why are you speaking to them? And what is the message? So in applications, I often see things like my, you know, public understanding of science is I'm going to go to schools and we're going to be there at open days. To what end? Which schools? How many kids? Why are you talking to them? What is the end game? What is the value? How will you measure the value of your science communication? Okay, so looking very specifically at NRF proposals, when you put them in, you need to, as I said, you need to look at the wider objectives of a particular context. So we're looking at what does the Department of Science and Innovation want to see? What does the national government want to see in the National Development Plan, for instance? You need to let your peers or your colleagues or your friends or anybody else guide you in writing these proposals. You need to get inputs from others. You need to look at sincere efforts of, you know, towards transformation, and you need to look at a sincere articulation of how these particular activities are going to meet government imperatives. So some of the things that I see for transformation, for instance. So this is not just transformation in terms of the researcher cohort or the student cohort. It's also transformation of the research endeavor. And, you know, how are you moving away from a northern-driven research agenda? How is the work that you're going to be doing going to benefit Africa or South Africa specifically? And these things, you know, these things are sincere. They need to be sincere. So writing in a proposal something along the lines of, I will do my best to recruit PDI students, you know, it's just not good enough. Some of the applications that we see, and again, Professor Stephen Chan, when you saw at the University of Stellenbosch, was brilliant with this. He used to collaborate with historically disadvantaged institutions and get his students from there. And, you know, that shows a really sincere, active intention to transform the student cohort, for instance. Who are your collaborators? Do you have women? Do you have women of color? Do you have South Africans of color? And, you know, having a collaborator on, there needs to be some kind of sincere articulation in your application on how these individuals are going to bring their knowledge and their learning to the table, and how your learning and your knowledge is going to move back into their institutions and into their spaces. So there was a question about or a mention about you know, what problems you need to, you know, what problems do or does society or members of society or a community, and by community I mean that widely. I don't necessarily mean that as poor, rural and black. You know, rather than saying here are solutions to the problems that you didn't know you had, you need to go and find out what these communities or these people or what society actually needs. So our National Development Plan gives a great breakdown of the problems that society has, but if you're going to focus on a specific community or a specific group and create a research proposal around that, co-creation and co-design is essential. Otherwise, there will not be impact. I can almost guarantee this. So I'll give you an example of one of the proposals that we received. Was a group went into a rural community, and the women spent a lot of time fetching water from the river. So they went and they put in a well or a borehole. And within 2 years, they had vandalized the borehole. And the reason behind this was because the women used the time alone when they went to collect water from the river to discuss the issues that they had at home. So putting in a borehole meant women didn't have to go to fetch water, which was great from a researcher point of view, but it created breakdown in social cohesion within a particular research community. So it's really important that there's co-design that will ensure uptake, and that will lead to the impact that government and, you know, that the NRF and government is specifically looking for. So because Professor Chan and others derailed my science into policy. Another thing that we see with proposals in terms of impact is my research will feed into policy. Which policy? Which government department? Who are you talking to? How are you going to get it in there? As was mentioned earlier, politicians do not read policy briefs. They're either not interested or they do not have the time. And if it's not solicited, it's unlikely that your work will make it into any kind of policy. The way to make it into policy, get your work into policy, obviously with the grounding with excellent science, as Stephen has said, is to volunteer your time. There are always initiatives going on, and I speak from an NRF DSI point of view, where we require inputs from the community to feed into larger policy conversations. within, for instance, the IOC. Gilbert and I work very closely together, and Gilbert has solicited information from me on more than one occasion to get information from our researchers. And sometimes it's really difficult to get that. You know, everybody's too busy with their own kind of thing. But if you raise your hand and you raise your voice, all of a sudden you become visible to Gilbert Siko. And Gilbert is the guy at the DSI who drives the policy within that particular space, or this particular space amongst others. Get involved with national committees like this one, but be careful not to limit it only to the science that you're particularly interested in. If somebody asks you, or there is a question, or there is an opportunity, get involved with the national committees. The South African National Committee for SCAR is very, very close to the SCAR coalface, and SCAR, you know, informs international policy. So if they know who you are and they already recognize your name, they're that much more likely to you know, to take an interest in what you might have to say. And a lot of the time the perception is that they're only looking for the A-rated scientists, or they're only looking for the top professors. We love having new, fresh voices, new ideas. We love the idea of succession planning, and succession planning is not only the role of your supervisor or your mentor or your boss or whatever. You need to look out for the opportunities where you can get closer to the coalface in terms of you know, visibility for government, visibility for other institutions. If UCT keeps seeing the same name from Forte popping up on policy briefs, they're all of a sudden going to want to work with Forte and get in on the action. So, you know, it's part of your own succession planning as well. I put my hand up, but I think we ran out of time. There was a question that came up earlier about the opportunities for PhD students in academia beyond the end of their PhD, or possibly beyond the end of their postdoc. And this is a question that we get quite a lot. And there is you know, there aren't hundreds and hundreds of opportunities and hundreds of academic posts that become available every year for you know, new PhD students to go into. But what there are a lot of opportunities that keep you close, or even bring you closer to the coalface of what is actually important. So PhD is required for most of the jobs in for instance, in government. You can look at the Departments of Science and Innovation, but you can also look at, for instance, international affairs. You know, getting involved with or looking for opportunities to work in international relations and international affairs, specifically in your particular area of expertise. It takes you much closer to government, it takes you much closer to the policy interface, and it keeps you in contact with what's going on in the higher education sector. Environmental affairs, environmental, forestry and fisheries, those guys. Departments of Higher Education and Training, again. ASAF is a great example. The NRF is a great example. You know, I don't know anybody who is closer to marine and coastal affairs and Antarctic affairs than I am. I'm not an expert in the field by any chance, but my position at the NRF makes me the go-to person for anyone at the Department of Science and Innovation, or anyone at the NRF, about anything relating to oceans, whether it's multilaterals, bilaterals, or local programs, projects, new instruments, anything like that. They come to me. You know, it does not take you away from your space. It might take you away from your specific research in that one little hoko on the island, but it gives you more opportunities to move away. And as Bettine said, it's not you know, it's not the end of the road. Because of the relationships that I have, I've been offered a range of very interesting jobs from people that I know via my various networks, to work in research offices, to apply for international positions, to do, you know, all kinds of different things. The fact that I love my job keeps me here, and until somebody puts me on a ship and sends me, well, on a plane and sends me to Antarctica, I'm not going to leave the NRF. So that's just my advice on PhD outside of academia. So I think it's important from a South African context, but also possibly from a global context, is that the national system of innovation in South Africa is in flux. At this particular point in time, there are a number of things that can either provide opportunities or derail the entire system, depending on how the higher ups handle it. And we need to be mindful of what those changes are and keep an eye out for opportunities. And if somebody asks to hear your voice, please, you know, just put your hand up. You know, it doesn't. There are no right or wrong, you know, opinions. There are new opinions. There's nothing wrong with you raising a concern or an opinion that creates debate and is then overridden. The people in the room will still remember who you are and realize that you're capable of independent thought, which is important. So one of the things, obviously, COVID-19 has severely impacted on not just South Africa, but everybody's access to the continent and to the islands, getting onto ships. The Marion Island voyage was cancelled. The dedicated cruises are going to be called into question. You know, the money and the access has been severely restricted and will be severely restricted for the foreseeable future. Changes at the government level, you've got at the Department of Science Innovation, Department of Higher Education and Training. For those of you that may not know, it is now one massive ministry. It's still not clear to us whether this is just a cosmetic change. So there's one minister, it's Bladen Zamandi, and he oversees both of the government departments. But the changes and the mergers of the two departments, we're still waiting to see what that is going to do. It might mean more money for the system. It might mean significant changes for the system. I think it's a good idea, as long as they don't, as long as it's not just cosmetic. The Department of Science and Innovation is currently working on a new decadal plan, which they keep promising is going to come out next month, but we'll see next month. I don't anticipate to see it for a while, but it is definitely going to map out themes where the government wants to see research happening. The geographic advantage areas, of which Antarctica and our access to advantage to South Africa are marine and coastal. Those are, you know, biodiversity. Those are national geographic advantage areas. They're unlikely to fall away, but once the decadal plan comes out, it will inform changes at the NRF. Changes at the NRF, we've got a lot of very senior people resigning. We're getting a new CEO hopefully in January, and all of you know what getting a new boss means. It means that everything gets changed, and positions and places and ideas and things like that. There's the plans, or there have been plans for a new research agenda or a research framework at the National Research Foundation, which has now been put on hold because we're waiting to see what the decadal plan says. And once we have the decadal plan, we need to see what the new CEO says. So it's a system in flux, and you need to keep your finger on the pulse as best you can with these changes that are happening within our national system of innovation. And then, yeah, the last thing I wanted you to, just as a take-home message, is for all of you to understand that not all good science and not all good proposals get funded. There are a number of reasons for that, not least of which are our governmental imperatives, our KPIs at the NRF. limited funding. There is only so much money to go around, and going into 2021, for instance, the Senate budget is going to be cut severely. The chances of us being able to support more than 10 applications is quite slim. At the moment, I support 34. So yeah, we're in for a rough ride. And we're looking at conflicting government priorities. So this talks specifically to the National Development Plan, the need to alleviate poverty, food security, looking at clean water and access to sanitation, versus us spending 17 million rand to send the Agulhas down to Marion Island. There are conflicting priorities, and this will kick in even more so with the decadal plan. So don't be discouraged if you don't get funded. Nobody likes to not get funded, but it is not necessarily because your ideas are not good, and it is not necessarily because you are failing as a scientist, or because you're an early career scientist. We actually set money aside in all of our programs to support early career scientists where we can. And as I said, there is definitely a new program coming out. I think it'll kick in 21, that is looking specifically at early career scientists. So yeah, let me see if there's anything else. Yeah, so going back to what Stephen said, read. Don't just read within your discipline, read outside of that. Imagine, think of ways where you can bring other disciplines into the work to answer the questions that you may have. Imagine ways that the work that you could do would make an impact on democracy studies or design, or maybe whatever you're doing, you need to take a photographer down with you so that you can do an art installation. I've seen that before with BAS. Again, planning for impact, co-design, plan for impact from the beginning. You plan for communication from the beginning, not after the fact. And this is really, really important. It can't just be seen as an add-on in your proposals, specifically nationally, but I see it internationally in our bilaterals and multilaterals as well. And then, what would this do for the world? Why should we spend money on whatever it is that you're proposing when there are really pressing social, economic, environmental concerns that the country needs to address? So I think I'll leave it there. I don't want to sound like I'm lecturing or boring anybody. And I hope that's been informative. Keep your eye on the NRF website, and obviously, if you build a relationship with me, I'll put you on my mailing list, and then you'll have access to everything that I have access to, and I'll know who you are.
Much, Tracy. That was incredibly comprehensive and interesting. You touched on multiple facets of getting access to, of thinking about research and planning one's research within the larger context of South Africa. So thank you so much for that. We won't have time for any more questions, but I think you really touched on many of the questions that were asked in the Google Doc anyway.
Sorry if I ran out of time.
No, it was great. Thank you so much. We're now going to move on to Ian, who's going to carry on this conversation talking about writing funding proposals.